So here we have the D4, and let's take a look. It's pretty heavy without the lens. The battery is already in here. Let's take a look at the battery. So, as you would expect from a professional grade SLR, this is powered by a 2000 milliamp battery, and it lasts about 700 to 800 shots on real world usage. But given how the D4 has amped up specs, a new sensor, HDMI video, what the real world usage would be like on this is yet to be tested. So you pop that back in, lock it in place, and so the back of the D4 is rather impressive. It's laden with buttons to make most options accessible very quickly. And a nice addition to the D4 from the previous models is these two joysticks that can be assigned for various functions, but the primary use that most photographers would look at would be to change focusing points in the camera. Another nice addition to the rather an ergonomic switch would be this little rubber nub that's been added when shooting in portrait orientation. The amazing thing about the redesign on the D4 is that they've tried to replicate the landscape shooting experience when you're shooting in portrait. So you have a shutter button, an AF lock button, a focus switching knob, and it feels pretty much the same as shooting in landscape. So photographers often need to do a depth of field preview. Of course, with a camera like this one, if you're shooting sports, that's not necessary. But sometimes out in the field, you decide to shoot some portraits, a macro. You want to feel, you want to get look good, nice idea of what the depth of field is like. So Nikon's placed the depth of field preview button right here next to the lens mount. So when you're idly holding the camera, your finger naturally is really close to the button right here, and it's really easy to just press the button, and you don't have to really stretch or anything. There is also a nice feature is the Nikon D4 has various focus algorithms that it employs, and depends on whether you want it to whether you want it to detect focus in automatic, or select just 9 points, or 21 points, or the 51 points. And the way you switch that is not necessarily through the menu, but rather through this AF selector switch. So traditionally the Nikon cameras normally just have a switch which is to go between AF and manual, but on top of this switch they've built a little button that you can press over here, and when you do so you get the option to switch from between the various focusing modes. And that's rather convenient if you ask me, because your hand's essentially right here and you don't have to really remove your eye or the camera from your eye, to just kind of switch things around. So now we're gonna mount a lens onto the camera and see what it feels like in the hand. We have the Nikon AFS 24mm f1.4 lens with us today, and this is regarded as one of the best primes by Nikon and would be comparable to the Canon L series. And we have that to go on our full frame D4. That's what the insides look like. They're absolutely beautiful. Okay, so the lens locks in place. It's one of those things that you really can't miss. The click is loud enough for you to identify that the lens is locked in place, so you really cannot make a mistake there. Once again, it's a pretty loud pop, and even the switch does not come back all the way up unless the lens is locked in place. So with the lens on, if you're using a very high quality lens, investing good money in your equipment, the D4 with the lens is quite a hefty setup, and we recommend using a camera strap at least, and so that you don't have to carry this all the time and not put so much strain on your hands. The display is quite informative. On the top left corner it shows what mode you're shooting in. In our case it's aperture priority, And interestingly, on the bottom right corner over here, we have the number of actuations that we've done so far. Next to that, you see the number of shots remaining on the memory card. It even shows what kind of card you're using. So in our case, that's CF and not the XQD, since there are two slots, memory card slots on the Nikon D4. And then you also see what kind of focus mode you're currently using, along with what sort of white balance and light metering. And well, when the shutter is pressed halfway, you also see your exposure compensation line. So yeah, that's a pretty informative display. As you can see, D4 sits rather comfortably. The ergonomics on this camera are absolutely phenomenal. I can hold it with one hand. In fact, yesterday I was shooting for about an hour without any issues. Yes, the camera is heavy, no doubt, but at the same time it does not feel uncomfortable or unnatural in your hands. It follows the contours of your fingers beautifully, and the indents and the curves are just phenomenal. And like I said, at the back there is a rubber nub when you're shooting in portrait orientation, like right here, where when you go into portrait mode, your thumb sits right next to it. So it adds a little bit of support and makes sure that even when your hands are getting tired, the camera does not accidentally slip out of your hand. It's a pretty deep groove, so even if I try to, it's not going to slip out of my thumb. And as you can see in the portrait mode, I feel pretty much no difference when shooting in landscape. The battery grip feels almost identical, even with respect to the controls at the back. So there's one potential problem that people with bigger hands could have. My hands aren't all that big, but so if you take a look at the space between my fingers and the lens, there's adequate space for me to kind of flap my fingers around, and they fit rather comfortably without any obstructions. I can reach the the depth of field preview button, no problem. However, when I do switch to portrait mode, like so, my fingers seem to hit the lens quite often, and I have to scrunch my fingers up a little bit to make sure that I'm not hitting the lens. And even if shooting in portrait mode, I need depth of field preview, I have to go back to this over here. So that's potentially two design problems. However, these shouldn't be much of a issue with people who would go in for a camera like this, because ideally this is best suited for sports photographers or media people. So, but yeah, the D4 looks beautiful, it feels amazing in your hand, and if you're not shooting with it, you can definitely use it as a weapon to protect yourself.